how did Yemen respond to these attacks against them? And is this applying pressure on the Yemeni people, in particular Ansarullah, who are giving the United States this headache? Well, the United States gave itself the headache, really, by going there to participate for the sake of Israel, burning US taxpayers' money for the sake of a genocidal entity against the innocent Yemeni people, and Ansarullah, who are conducting a totally legit operation to stop a murderous country that is killing children inside of the Gaza Strip. Well, it's not that they only continued, they escalated. They escalated their attacks. So before we get into this escalation, the United States, they introduced a new aircraft carrier in the Red Sea, in the region, USS Carl Vinson, in the Middle East, ahead of Iran-US nuclear talks. This was only 3 days ago, and I spoke about this report when the talks started coming out previously about the United States sending another strike group led by the aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson. Why did they send the USS Carl Vinson? Isn't the USS Harry S. Truman enough? And why is the United States changing so many aircraft carriers? They're supposed to be so protected, so immune from attacks, and so advanced. What's happening? Well, clearly, the attacks of Yemen against these aircraft carriers are very productive. There were reports that there were direct attacks against all of the previous US aircraft carriers that led to them withdrawing. Now, the United States is saying that, well, USS Carl Vinson is there to only add to support the current aircraft carrier. However, it's taking the lead. It's taking the lead instead of USS Harry S. Truman. Now, the argument of the United States is, oh yeah, just the support, and we're going back to maintenance. But that's only really an excuse. At the end of the day, there were significant attacks against them. The United States censors this heavily. There were some confirmed images coming out, not all of them. Some people, of course, you need to filter the information because some people also faked images on social media. But regardless of those fake reports, there were confirmed images of Ansarullah targeting aircraft carriers. And there were also reports coming from the United States about the staff of these aircraft carriers facing difficulties. Therefore, it wouldn't be surprising if USS Harry S. Truman is going back to the United States, or maybe other nearby locations that would house it or allow it to use its ports for any sort of short-term or urgent maintenance before it sails back to the United States. But clearly now, the Carl Vinson is taking the lead. Carl Vinson is taking the lead, and what's happening? When Carl Vinson is taking the lead, Yemen is targeting Carl Vinson immediately. So there was a report today confirming that the armed forces of Yemen, led by Ansarullah, target Ben Gurion Airport. That's number one. The aircraft carriers Truman and Vinson. So they began with Vinson and they attacked Truman as well. And they shot down another MQ-9, the 20th MQ-9, officially now $660 million US gone in the winds of Yemen. After Yemen took down so many of them, and the United States keeps sending them. Again, it's very surprising. But they targeted Carl Vinson and they targeted Israel. And there were reports that there was another area inside of Israel being targeted by Ansarullah in Yemen. Therefore, we can understand from all of this that, number one, the Yemenis are not phased. As a matter of fact, the spokesperson of Ansarullah, Yahya Sari', the spokesperson of the armed forces, Yahya Sari', was seen in this image. He said that these attacks will not deter them, but add more determination. And the people on the streets, millions, like behind him, this is a poster, but on the streets there were millions of people, again, the Palestinian flags, and showing solidarity, unbelievable levels of solidarity every single week. a million at least in the Yemeni streets. So this is something very important to reiterate, is that the Yemeni armed forces and Ansarullah have a mandate from the people. It's the people who are requesting them to do so, and they are acting on behalf of the people. Unlike all of the other countries across the world where you have people protesting and it's either shut down and people being imprisoned, like the land of the free and the home of the brave in other countries across the world. And in other cases, they do not represent the majority of the public, with marches in tens or hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of people in the streets. But instead, they take steps against these people demonstrating, trying to, well, show them as if they are, supporting something illegal or something like that, just because they're standing up against a genocide, against the biggest genocide in the 21st century, biggest infanticide, biggest massacres against reporters, children, students, scholars, healthcare staff, all of that. So the attacks of the United States are not effective, but they are still conducting these attacks. And Donald Trump is conducting these attacks when he's also talking with Iran. Now, with Iran, he was trying to show as if he is kind of trying to apply pressure on them and warn them by saying either reach a deal or we will bomb you. But yesterday, I spoke about the report that was published in the New York Times, and then it was later on published in Israel as well, that Donald Trump, no, he actually applied pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu not to attack the nuclear facilities inside of Iran. Today, there was also another report in Israel saying that the opposition leader, Yair Lapid, told Benjamin Netanyahu, or urged Benjamin Netanyahu back in October, to attack the Iranian oil fields so that he can paralyze the economy of Iran. And according to him, that would definitely lead to a regime collapse, as he called it. He thinks like the government in Iran is fragile. He doesn't understand that they have so much popularity in Iran, regardless of the propaganda that you hear constantly, of course, on the mainstream media. And according to him, according to Yair Lapid, in that report in Israel, he was like criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu. He was criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu because he did not attack Iran. So you have the opposition leader wanting to add more war, as if for the people who are, waiting for any signs of like hope or anything. No. And the people who are signing these petitions against the war, this is purely against what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing. But the majority, it's not like a big problem with genocide or any of Israel's atrocities inside of the Gaza Strip. There are a few who oppose that outright, and they do have voices. They're trying to censor them as much as possible in Israel. But the opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu, we're talking about people who support crimes against humanity outright and a genocide inside of the Gaza Strip, turning a blind eye to the suffering of the Palestinian people. Now, how is that affecting the developments with Yemen? How is that affecting the negotiations with Iran? Because the United States, Trump himself, he previously tied the direct attacks of Ansarullah in Yemen to Iran. And he even previously stated that Iran will be held responsible for every missile attack, every bullet shot fired by Ansarullah against the American terror forces in the region. But we spoke about yesterday or the day before about the fact that the United States said that there's going to be a meeting in another country between Iran and the United States to follow up on the talks. And that was something a little bit suspicious, because Oman, the country that was hosting these meetings and that hosted a lot of meetings to try and mediate between different countries, Oman played a very important role when China had this mediation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and also other global conflicts too. So why did the United States now declare that they want another country? And now today we have a clarification why the United States chose another country. It's not without a reason. So Oman, apparently, they shut their ports to the United States warships. They told them no refueling and no replenishment. You can't be here. You can't refuel here. You're not welcome here. And that's a country that has normal ties with the United States. And like I said, they facilitated a lot of mediation talks and reconciliations between the United States and other countries too. Now they're telling them, no, you're not refueling here, no replenishment, nothing whatsoever. You're not welcome. And the United States, they tried to keep this on the low. They did not say anything outright against Oman because they didn't want to look embarrassed. Donald Trump is really conscious about these situations where he's put in his place and he feels embarrassed. So the United States, they didn't even talk about any of that. But this report came out today, and that is clearly showing why the United States is asking for another country to mediate instead of Oman. And that's also showing another very important thing. A country like Oman, without a lot of significant power. I mean, Oman, talk about, by the way, a lovely country with lovely people. By the way, anyone who went to Oman, they will tell you what a beautiful country, amazing food, and the people are so nice over there. I haven't personally been there, but I've heard that from everyone who went to Oman. But at a state level, the country, it's not like they have the biggest armies or whatever. No, they're not like that. And they always try and have reconciliations and peace processes between countries, de-escalation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, make peace here and there. They do their bit, and it also reflects the nature of the country. So that's showing you that a country, not necessarily, that doesn't obtain necessarily a lot of power, can have influence and can have its say, and can actually refuse the United States demands and requests to use their ports or anything as such. And that's also an example to other things that might happen or have been happening in the background. Let's not forget, like some of the Gulf states who have been criticized for their positions, they also refuse to allow the United States to conduct an attack against Iran. Now, there is a notion that they know their vulnerabilities too, but not all of them have the same level of bases of the United States, for example. And not all of them are totally aligned with the US position, despite them, or some of them, not taking the required action at the required level in relation to Gaza. This is something very important. That's in relation to the United States, Yemen, and the talks with Iran and Oman. Now, moving on to Gaza and the Palestinian resistance. There were significant attacks from the Palestinian resistance in the past 48 hours against the genocide forces inside of the Gaza Strip, led primarily by the armed wing of Hamas, the Izz al-Din al-Qassam brigades. So today there was this report, they detonated a tunnel under a Zionist force and targeted 5 occupation military vehicles south of Khan Yunis. So there was a booby trap tunnel that they detonated, and in an area called, what was that area called? Khizan al-Najjar, south of Khan Yunis, they targeted other Israeli D9 bulldozers and other vehicles and machinery with Yasin 105 RPGs and a Shuwadh explosive device that they create and manufacture, alongside another barrel bomb, added by more attacks coming from the armed wing of the PIJ, the Saray al-Quds or al-Quds brigades, who launched missiles on the genocide forces inside of Rafah. So the Palestinian resistance is now clearly popping up more. And in this report, by the way, that came up today about the Al-Qassam brigades specifically, they said after returning from the battle lines, our fighters confirmed the detonation of 3 highly explosive devices. That's in one of them, meaning that these fighters are not even being touched. They're not being seen, they're not being touched, they're returning peacefully, and no one's finding out where they are. Showing you the level of, stupidity and failure of the Israeli genocide forces inside of Gaza. Again, confirming what they actually say, that they are having this operation against the people, whether when it comes to blocking every single aid to starve people to death and kill people who need medication and force people to have surgeries, and in many cases unsuccessful, without anesthesia, including children who die because of that, killing infants and fetuses even, with horror images coming on social media, the social media platforms who allow such images to be published. But it's important for people to know what this genocide entity is committing inside of the Gaza Strip, no matter how graphic it is, because it's happening somewhere in the world. But they're not targeting anything to do with the resistance. That's why they are being roasted now. They're being roasted by the Palestinian resistance, who has now clearly decided that they want to take more confrontations against Israel in all parts of Gaza, whether it's in the south, in Khan Yunis, where they're trying to enter in the south, or other parts of Gaza too. And again, Israel is not showing that it has a strategy. Israel is not showing that it has a strategy against the Palestinian resistance. As a matter of fact, their confirmations are leading to more problems internally inside the state of Israel. And one of these problems now is not only with the pilots and the paratroopers and Unit 8200. No, today you have outright, and this was reported just from approximately 3 days ago, Golani Brigade. The Golani Brigade soldiers, they signed a letter to end the war in Gaza and have immediate talks to release the captives, release the Israelis from the Gaza Strip who are held by the Palestinian resistance. And this is spreading like wildfire, and you have people inside of the Israeli army outright calling to stop the war. So 2 weeks ago, when this petition started, some in the Israeli army were criticizing and they were complaining that, well, some of the reservists are, being free at liberty to criticize, and some of those who are serving are, taking a step back, fearful from any potential repercussions. But now it's as if everything fades, as if they collapsed to this wall of fear, this historical taboo, this traditional taboo in Israel called the army from hell. And now they're criticizing it outright. They're criticizing outright without any fears of repercussion. And the leaders of the Israeli army, like the chief of staff or the head of the Air Force, for example, despite them threatening to sack some of them, and they have indeed sacked some, with some of their threat, they haven't followed through. Why? Because they have no option. They don't have anyone to replace them. It's like someone has a business and they want to fire one of their staff and they don't have an alternative, or they don't have a plan B. Similar to, the UK leaving the EU without a plan B, something like that. So Israel is struggling heavily, and more criticism is coming from the people inside of the Israeli army now. But one of the most dangerous things that I came across today was actually an article about an Israeli retired major general. His name is Giora Island. Giora Island is a man who held senior figures in the Israeli security establishment. He was the head of the national security in Israel, and he was also a major general in the Israeli army. He made some strong statements today against Benjamin Netanyahu and against the state of Israel. And the most important and dangerous statements that he made is that Israel will be having no elections in the future. So there was this report in the Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv on Giora Island saying there will be no elections. The government will make sure they don't defeat him at the ballot box. Defeat him in reference to Benjamin Netanyahu. why is he saying that there will be no elections? What's going to happen? And he was asked, aren't you being like too dramatic that, oh, Israel will have no elections? He said, no, actually, the rationale is very simple. Turning a democracy, as he's calling it, of course, a democracy, from a democracy to a dictatorship takes several steps. The man is already trying to control the army, the security establishment, sacking the head of the Shin Bet and appointing someone who will be another poodle. He is actively seeking to control the committee that appoints judges in the Israeli High Court or Supreme Court. And all of these are steps that are initially taken before more dramatic measures are taken. Therefore, Benjamin Netanyahu, as soon as he starts implementing more of these actions, he will have any excuse to control, dictate, and force the Israeli public to submit to his will. At the end of the day, according to him in that article, if you're talking about democracy, you're talking about like an oath or mutual trust between the people and the state, where the people will have certain sacrifices for the state, in many cases of taxation, or like doing things that risk their lives, like being sent to war, to protect the actual state. And the way Benjamin Netanyahu is moving on with his actions in relation to the continued genocide, despite constant criticism, the lack of reaching to an agreement, and him appointing people who will only delay any potential agreement, him opposing suggestions and advice from the security establishment on his approach towards the war or the genocide in Gaza, him sacking or forcing the previous IDF chief of staff to resign, now officially sacking Ronen Bar and facing confrontations with the Supreme Court, then opening so many fronts so that if one front de-escalates, he can have an excuse, escalate another front, throw some gasoline in, and have more excuses to get himself out of trouble when it comes to the court cases and hearings that he is facing on a weekly basis, and tell them, I need an exemption, I have an exemption, I have something urgent to do, and I cannot attend. And they will tell him, yes, sure, Prime Minister, you don't have to come today because I need to make an important decision, or I have a security meeting. So according to that rationale of Gura Island, the retired Major General, Netanyahu will easily lead Israel to a place where he will actually cancel the elections, because the elections are in October 2026. And judging by how long this has gone so far now, the fact that the man tried to delay and actually delayed ceasefire agreements going against the Israeli negotiating delegation's will and the will of the majority of the Israeli population who want to stop the war, and doing all of these things, well, he now has a poodle in the form of Ron Dermer leading the negotiating delegation, who was heavily criticized by the families of the prisoners of war. Yesterday, we spoke about the criticism that came from the families of the prisoners of war after they met him, where they said we felt hopeless and powerless, and there was no action plan, and we were not given any deadlines whatsoever. He only spoke about 3 to 6 months with no action plan whatsoever, meaning that Benjamin Netanyahu, well, he actually has the capacity, he has the power, and he has the people to lead Israel to places it has never been before. And that would include dramatic moves such as outright canceling the elections or manipulating them to a level where they would secure Benjamin Netanyahu's position in power for the rest of his life.